Hello everyone, today we're going to see what we are playing against the Italian force move d3, and later we're going to see some sidelines afterwards. So let's start. First move e4 as always, white is going for the center, we are replying with the same e5 with a classical approach. Knight f3 targeting the pawn on e5, we're defending with knight coming to c6. Bishop c4, that's how Italian game starts. Here main ideas of white is comparison to the bishop coming to b5 is to get some slow game and just continue developing the pieces. At some moment going for something like d4. And there are a few approaches here as for black. One of them is just normal developing move, bishop c5, which would be an opposite to what we are going for, because we are having knight f6 targeting the pawn on e4, basically immediately creating some imbalances in the position. And here we are entering the two knights defense, where white developed two knights as a second and third move. Of course, it allows such moves as knight coming to g5, but generally this move is more fighting and we're going to get more diverse positions, as for example bishop coming to c5. And in this chapter, as I already said, we're going to talk about the d3 line. So what is, first of all, d3 is the decent move which is supporting the pawn on e4. White wants to finish the development and later maybe slowly go for c3, d4. That's kind of a plan of white because there is no other good move which can defend the pawn on e4 than d3. So now there are many options, of course, for black. There are many moves here in the position, and we're going to go for the d5. d5 is not the main move in the position, but it's pretty much direct. We can go for it already. We are fully ready since we support with a knight, with a queen. We're defending the pawn as much as needed. Of course, it's not refuting the Italian game, but we're going to get some interesting positions, pretty much imbalanced, and we're going to have chances. And of course, as for white and as for black, but we decided to go for this approach because it looked like a very direct, and from here on we can say immediately that the game is not going to be slow and quiet as Italian maybe want sometimes. So we might say that we already kind of changed this the pace of the game after this move. So of course, main move here for white to take on d5, because that's normally how you should react. But there are also some other moves. For example, this bishop going back to b3 or forward to b5. So these two moves, because obviously bishop is under attack right now. You either take on d5 or you move the bishop away or forward. So we're going to start with bishop b5 move, which is pretty bad. I mean, generally, of course, if black goes for d5, it's critical choice and white has to take. Not taking is not really working so well for white, because now we can take on e4. And now knight e5, taking the pawn due to the pin on c6. At this moment, I want to ask you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. We had similar positions, or we have similar positions in the other chapters, where the bishop and knight are targeting the knight on c6, and sometimes we have had the idea of queen coming to g5. This particular case, it wouldn't be possible even if the knight was not on f6, if the pawn would be on d2. But in this case, there is a better option, queen d5, targeting both knight and the bishop from d5. Now, either knight or bishop has to take on c6. Okay, of course, if knight takes queen c5, and we're just doing great. In case bishop takes, we're taking with a pawn. So knight cannot really go back. I mean, there are no real moves besides knight c4. But there is also d4. First of all, not letting black to take on d3, and also centralizing the pawn, bringing it to d4 and defending the knight. c5, we're immediately challenging the pawn, because Knight is going to be loose on e5. c3 defending the pawn instantly, very logical. Bishop d6, and we are fully ready to finish our development. We're having a bishop pair advantage in the position, and we're going to attack the white center. The pawn on d4 and the knight on e5 is going to be always a problem for white. We're going to undouble our pawns. That's the most important. For that, we're having a clear advantage in the position. If bishop goes back on b3, it's also possible. We can say that it's slightly better move than bishop b5, but it's of course not ideal to react on d5 like this. So we take on e4, and the main idea of the move is that knight g5 now is possible, targeting both f7 and e4 pawn, which white can take. Um, of course, we shouldn't really be afraid because the knight g5 move was even earlier possible, so this position is also not such a big deal. And since we already took a pawn on e4, we can give it back by playing bishop e6. So if bishop takes on e6, we grab it. There are two choices now for white: to do something about this pawn or to do something about the e6 pawn. In case pawn takes on e4, we are trading the queens coming into the endgame. And here we're going for castle. Knight e2, trying to stop, block the castle, and develop the piece at the same time. And at this moment, I want you to ask you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. I hope you found it. Since we already finished the development, we can create another thread. Also, let's not forget about this thread from white. But we have knight g4, immediately targeting the f2 pawn. We're ready to develop also bishop later to c5, targeting the pawn on f2. It's not going to be easy for white to stop all the threats in the position, and we're already slightly better. If knight takes on e6, it's not going to be good. The knight might get trapped on e6, but of course we go for queen d7. Now knight is forced to take on f8. There are no other squares outside for the knight. So knight takes on f8, rook f8, and after a short castle, we're going for a long castle. The problem is that pawn on e4 cannot be taken, and we're creating a critical attack, critical pressure on the d3 pawn, which is going to fall in the next moves. So if knight takes on e4, that's kind of a best try in this position, but it's still not enough. We're going to take, pawn takes, and we play queen h4 with the idea of targeting e4. Also, at the same time, we are ready to finish the development with bishop c5 and bring the king to the king side castling, which would open the h file for the rook. Would be amazing because f2 is going to be very weak. In case of queen e2, we are going for knight d4, which comes with a tempo attacking the queen. Again, white has to take care of the e4 pawn, so queen d3, trying to defend. And now bishop c5, developing all the pieces. We have already 3 pieces in the game as a big compensation for the just 2 double pawns, which we could be happy about due to the fact that rook would be very strong on f8. Castle, castle, rook is entering the game from f8. And here, after bishop e3, we just bring the other rook. We have more than the compensation. We can say we have an absolutely winning position. We have potentially some stress already, bringing knight to f3 with a check, sacrificing it, and checkmating the white's king. So it's going to be very tough for white to defend this attack on the king and survive. In case castle here, we're just taking the pawn because our pawns are actually defended. Of course, it's not fully an extra pawn. If pawn would be on f6, it would be, of course, much better, or d6. But it's absolutely fine because it's still better than no pawn. And well, we're just going to finish the development, bringing the bishop out. We are going to see where we are going to castle, but most likely we're just bringing bishop out to c5, castle, and try to put more pressure on the f2 square. So what happens if knight takes on f6 and e6? White is trying to keep the bishop in the game, which brings more sense. We take on the e6 and bishop takes. Now we're grabbing already on d3. In case queen takes, we're ready to trade the queens, and after knight b4, basically we're going to win back the d3 pawn. Or we're going to give a fork. So the position of white is pretty bad. We are clearly better here. C-pawn takes on d3, but okay, it creates a weakness on d3 now, and we're just going for our main plan, queen d6. In the next move, we're ready to castle and bring the rook to attack the pawn on d3. So bishop h3 is trying to stop our castling opportunity, but here we can go rook d8. We don't need to castle. It is still possible to bring the rook on d8, targeting the pawn on d3, and we can castle short side later. Castle, we take the pawn. Queen a5, white is trying to create a pin to do something on the queen side, not to trade the pieces, because if white would trade the queens, we're getting into winning endgame, extra pawn. But here there's just rook d4, and there is no real square for the queen to go, and we're going to win material like this. So that would be losing already for white. That was bishop b3. Now we're going to go into the main line. What happens if white is taking? Of course, we're recapturing with a knight. And here there are a bunch of moves for white now. So this is a position where we enter, where we're going to look at some sidelines. And the main move which we're going to look for is castle. So we're going to start with some maybe a bit more ridiculous moves, or moves that don't bring so much sense. Let's start with bishop g5. First of all, if knight would be on f6, I could understand this move, but without knight on f6, and considering the fact, actually, that in this position, e5 is one of our problems. We're happy to play f6, attacking the bishop, stopping the attack on the queen, and defending the pawn on e5. So we are absolutely happy to get this. Bishop comes to h4, now bishop e6, we are ready to play queen d7, long castle, and create an attack against the king on the king side with g5, h5, knight coming to f4. So this is not really how it's going to work for white. In case bishop d5, it's another very strange and bad move, but actually it's third most common move in this position in over the board games. It's very interesting. So we're just grabbing the bishop, knight c3, and to just go back with the queen to d6, defending on e5. In the next moves, again, we are ready to develop bishop f5, long castle, and push with f6, g5, h5, and so on the king side. So that's, of course, clearly better as well. If bishop goes to b5, okay, this move actually is working together with what is happening in this position, because in current position which we get after d5, after trade on d5, we have two main issues as black. One of the issue is the e5 pawn, and the other issue is f7 pawn. So this move is more trying to address the e5 square problems and immediately creating a threat. But of course, we can neutralize it pretty easily with bishop coming to d6, defending the pawn on e5. Okay, white can, of course, white can make our structure pretty bad on the queen side, but it's okay because we're getting a bishop pair. And for now, since there are so many pieces on the board, we're not in the end game. For now, we're having good compensation for it. So castle, now knight b2 and bishop g4. We have all the pieces out in the game. We are ready to go for the f5 to create very nice pawns in the center, bring the rook to e8. The pawn on c6 at some moment can be placed on c5, it depends, but for now it's not even a target yet. Due to all the pawns of white on the queen side, it's not going to be a target anytime soon. So meanwhile, we should try to work and build on our advantage, which is a bishop pair advantage. So that's something what we should work on in the next moves. So that was bishop b5. Now we go into some other moves like knight g5. Okay, so first of all, knight g5 is interesting because it's creating a threat of attacking on f7 and introduction of the queen to f3 or h5 since our knight left to d5. So it's pretty logical to go for this. But As for black, it's also important to know the reaction on this move, because the problem for us is if we are going to react in like with something pretty normal move. For example, bishop e7 would be a normal move, developing the bishop and attacking the knight. But after bishop e7, problem is that there are some options which are very unpleasant for black. Okay, we can start with, first of all, not even moving the knight from g5, but playing knight c3. So now the main idea is that white is targeting the knight on d5, and knight is pinned due to the bishop, and there is a huge pressure on f7. So in case we take the knight on g5, white would take the knight on d5 with a bishop. We grab the other piece, the trade happens, and now we're getting into the position comparing to the position which we had in some previous line, where we had enormous amount of pieces. We had bishop pair, we had better development, and we had these weak pawns. There, of course, the position was slightly better for us because we simply had better development, and that was of course the biggest compensation for this bad pawn structure. At least short term, we could build on our advantage. But in this position, it's going to be difficult because material is getting more and more limited, and white will have more chances to target the weaknesses. So that position is clearly better for white. In case of knight takes on c3, which would create a threat of taking the queen, there is queen h5, removing the queen from d1 with a checkmate threat ideas. So now if we go g6, bishop takes, king d7, we have to go here because otherwise there will be a checkmate from queen h6. So this is not possible. So that's why king d7, and here after queen h4. Basically, the position is very shaky with the king. It's not possible to see the way how to hide the king as fast as possible. White is clearly better. We don't want to enter this kind of position. But as well as knight c3, there is also knight f7 for white, sacrificing the knight for the time being. Because after king f7, there is queen f3, which would target two pieces. After king e6, there is knight c3, attacking knight again. And since our king is in the center and there are so many active white pieces, it's a very tough position to handle as for black. There is for sure a big compensation for the piece, but the attack is still ongoing. So that's why bishop e7 is not really good move, even though it's developing a bishop and attacking the knight and getting ready to castle, but it's not working. So very important to remember f6. Here we go for f6. We are not letting knight to be sacrificed on f7. We're not letting any kind of action here, just we're kicking the knight out of g5 square. And here another interesting approach. Okay, first of all, let's see what if knight's going back on e4. Well, it's just absolutely fine. Everything, we get rid of the knight from g5. We get rid of all the attacks. Now we are placing queen on d7. Next move, we already developed bishop to e6, queen d7, long castle. We're having great position. Due to the pawn on e5, we're going to have long-term better position. And since we already actually stabilized on e5, because all this f6, knight coming to c6, everything is just defending the pawn, there is not much white can do about that. Here there is another move, queen f3. So targeting the knight and also creating some kind of pin on f7, but it's not really working out so well. Anyway, what I would like you to do right now is to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. I hope you managed to find it. It's knight d4. So we're challenging the knight. It's a very typical move. When there is a knight on f3 and there is nothing like c3 in the position, we go for knight d4, attacking the queen, attacking the pawn on c2. And the problem here is, even though our knight is under attack, we're letting it be taken. Since after queen d5, we have to trade. And now we go for knight c3, taking the material on a1. And we're going to have, for sure, an advantage. Computer is already saying it's a winning endgame as for black. And yeah, knight is under attack. There might be some way to get the knight out. It's not clear yet how, but white would also have to spend a lot of time to get the knight to win that knight. So yeah, we're getting such a great position as well. Though the most critical move and the most critical approach in this position after f6 is knight c3, attacking the knight. And it's actually very good to know how to handle it. It was played only a few times in few games, but very important to know how to deal with it. Since if we don't know, we can absolutely go wrong from this moment on, and we will not even understand what happened. In case you just take on c3, which feels like a good move, just taking, attacking the queen, well, it's all going good, there is suddenly bishop f7. If we go to e7 square, there is just bc3, and the point is that we cannot take on g5 due to the bishop g5 and winning our queen. Just to illustrate you. Okay, so it's not working. King d7. Well, there is bc again. Now we kind of can take the knight, right, on g5. But then queen g4 check. If we go to e7, we are attacking the queen, opening an attack on the queen. But queen just goes to f3, defending the knight on f7. And these threats are pretty much unstoppable. White is getting huge positions. Computer saying it's already winning for white. So we shouldn't get there. We should be really careful. That's why we have to know in this position there is a move which is still great for black. And this is bishop b4. We're neutralizing any ideas of taking on d5 by pinning that knight on c3. But it's also logical. We're developing the bishop at the same time. We're putting, we're pinning this knight. So it looks very, very logical. So now knight has to move, knight g to e4, and at the same time defending the knight on c3. Well, now bishop e3, as we already discussed, defending the knight on d5 and getting ready for finishing the development. Either we're going to castle long with queen d7 or castle short. When, for example, here, if white is going immediately for a castle, we can also just castle short. We don't have any problems. There are no threats from white, and we managed to keep our pawn on e5, which is going to bring us the static advantage of the space advantage in the center for some time. We're going to see how we're going to use it. Later on, we can see if we can play like h6 and push the pawn forward, or if we can do something in the center. But since our king is going to be on g8, we have to be really careful with all the pawn moves. But position is, other than that, is just great to achieve as for black. Objectively, it's around equal. So that was the knight g5 move, which, again, pretty dubious. Now we're going to go with in the other ideas for white, which is the move c3 bringing. The idea is for white to bring the queen to b3 to target the pawn f7. As we already discussed earlier, there are two ways for white to find something in the position. First one to target the pawn on e5, second one is to target the pawn on f7. And in this case, white is playing c3, so that queen could go on b3 and the pawn on f7 could be targeted. Again, if we're going to develop, if we're continuing just development without looking at what is white doing, we might get into trouble. So that's why it's pretty important to react after this move correctly, not allowing queen coming. Because, for example, after bishop g4, let's say it's just normal developing move, pinning the knight, looks great. Queen b3 could be played. Queen b3 already is there. So, for example, if we take on f3, pawn takes, knight a5, feels like a great move, right? Oh, I cannot do it there. Queen a4, check, knight goes back, and we have to settle for a draw. Oh, if we're okay with a draw, we can also do it. And again, the same here. If knight a5, there is knight a4, knight a6, and again, we have to settle for a draw. So if we are okay with a draw, we can, of course, go for this and let white make a draw quickly and go home and rest. But I would, of course, always endorse the game. Even if we lose, like many times, I was also afraid to draw, like in some positions relatively early on, could have accepted them. but I always choose to fight. I don't offer draws actually myself, so I always play on. And if someone offers draw, then I can see if I accept it or if I continue. But generally, in the opening stage or like in early middle game stage, I'm not accepting a draw unless I feel like my position is pretty bad. Which I don't know when happened it last time. Okay, so that's why we have to know how to react, and we go for knight b6. We're going to see this move in the other chapters, or we already saw. It depends if you already studied the chapter. That knight b6 is one of the main moves. We're actually going to see it in this chapter as well after the move castle, targeting the bishop and letting white decide what white wants to do with the bishop. And the big problem of this is that, okay, already in this position, white spend this time on this c3 move. So if white is going to go for this b5 lines, it's not going to be so critical as after castle. And if white is going to go with the bishop to b3, again, it's also not going to be so critical since queen cannot go to b3 any longer. d3 is going to be weaker. And white spent this extra tempo on move c3, potentially also removing a square from the knight. But okay, of course, it's a possible line. So let's see how it would continue. It's not something like losing for white, but it's maybe a bit more inaccurate, I would say. So bishop b5. Let's say if white is focusing on the e5 pawn. So if bishop goes to b5, white is focusing on b5 pawn. If white is going with the bishop to b3, white is focusing on the f7 pawn. Here, the focus is on e5. Okay, so we continue our development. Bishop b6, defending the pawn. Castle, castle. Okay, in case bishop c6, white is trying to make our structure. Sorry. White is trying to break our structure on the queen side. And, well, after rook e1, we're going for rook e8. Of course, we are defending, but in return for this pawn structure, we got bishop pair, knight b2, and here we go for c5. Stopping any ideas of d4, making the d3 pawn weak. Potentially, we can play f6 to support the pawn on e4, e5. It's going to be a great pawn, great central pawn. Again, we're going to have more space in the center. I will remove the queen bishop back and bring the bishop potentially to b7 or a6 to attack the pawn on d3. In case rook e1 is played instantly, well, we're going to the same approach. We are defending all with all pieces on e5 because white is threatening to take on c6 and win the pawn. So knight b2, white is continuing the development. Here we are in time to play bishop d7 to defend the knight on c6. So in the next move, we are ready to attack and harass the bishop from the b5 square. And, well, this... we're getting very good position. Again, with this e5 pawn, we solved all our issues. d5 immediately, it would be the best try in this position. And it would be try, of course, to equalize, but it's not working as well as white would have thought. Because here we're taking on d5, rook trade happens, queen takes, knight e4. And now we have a very nice move. Bishop g4. We are using the fact of the weak back rank. Queen cannot take definitely because there is queen e1 checkmate. So actually it's not checkmate, but it's going to be a checkmate. So if queen goes to f1, just trying to hold the back rank, then we have queen e5. We're attacking all the pieces, all the squares, queen h2. It's very easy, very difficult to defend. Also taking on d4 in some moment, bringing the rook. So this position is pretty much collapsing. White is pretty much collapsing. So let's see what happens after queen g4. I said first checkmate because I forgot about the bishop, but of course bishop can return back. Bishop f1 could be played, but now we're just taking another bishop. The knight and the rook are pinned on the queen side, and well, we're just going to have a definitely winning position because of all our pieces activity. Our rook is ready to come out into the game as well, so there are no problems for black, rather just completely crushing position. if bishop decides to stay on the a2 g8 diagonal, putting pressure on the f7, already what we achieved is that the queen cannot get to b3 any longer, and the c3 move was just played for no reason. And that would weaken also the d3 square, unless white can go for d4 very quickly. So let's see if white can do it. So first of all, in this position, it's very important, and generally in these positions, it's very important not to lose the focus, because we have to focus on our problems. If in short term we're going to fix our problems, defend our weak squares, we're going to do very well. If we're not going to do it, we're going to have troubles. So that's why we have to look at the f7 square and all opportunities for white to attack it, which is, of course, one of them is knight coming to g5. And basically, we have to always know how do we react on knight g5. Does it work? Does it not work? In this position, if we play something like bishop d6, defending the pawn, developing the piece, white is going to play knight g5. We have to calculate this. Does it work? Because after castle, queen is coming to h5 and we are losing. We're losing basically, yeah, it's not possible even to defend everything. Like we're going to lose in few moves. So that's why we shouldn't forget about this threat. And we're going to see later also in the main line in this chapter that how do we react on the bishop b3 move. Because here we react with developing the bishop. So what do we bring? Why do we bring the bishop? First of all, okay, later we could have opportunities to play queen d7, queen e7 to long castle. Second, of course, is pointing out on the d3 problem. And, well, a third thing is that this bishop is going to be good defense later on g6 for the f7 square, in case there is some issue, and also h7. If there is some issue, bishop is going to defend very nicely. So it's very important to remember, if bishop is on b3, where we have to develop the bishop. In the main line, we're going to go for the bishop g4. Sometimes we also go for bishop f5, but mainly bishop g4 and bishop f5. So bishop f5. Also, it's moves with which we develop the bishop with a tempo, attacking the pawn on d3. In comparison, for example, to knight to bishop g4 main line, there is no b3 weakness, so d3 weakness, so it's not really working. In case of g4, white is immediately trying to equalize by trading the pawns. So we are taking, we have nothing better to do. Pawn takes, and after finishing the development, we arrive at the position with an isolated queen's pawn on which we can push later in the game. So it's around equal position, but due to the pawn, we could have some chances, and we just have to create an attack on the pawn on d4. So if bishop comes back to c2 defending the pawn like this, well, we should be very happy, because this bishop generally should be a good piece and should be located on either a2 g8 diagonal or a4 e8. So queen d7 and followed by the long castle, and more pressure on d3 pawn is coming. Meanwhile, our pawn on e5 is safe, and the pawn on f7 is safe as well. What happens if knight g5 is coming now, targeting the f7 square? Well, then we're going for bishop g6. Our main idea with this bishop move out to f5. In case there is knight g5, we can follow it up with bishop to g6. Castle, now bishop e7, we're attacking the knight. Of course, if we would play something like f6, it would weaken this diagonal very much. Of course, it just depends. We want to go short castle, long castle, but here most likely we don't know yet how it's going to continue. So bishop e7, knight e4, and after queen d7, okay, we're already ready for the long castle. Pawn has to stand on d3 to defend the knight, but we're going to put more and more pressure against the pawn, and it will be very tough for white to defend. So that was a c3 move. Doesn't bring too many problems, and we are getting some similar ideas from the main line. Later we'll see. Knight c3 is another move, but it's not really challenging. But of course, it's important. It's important, of course, react in the correct way. And I think it's very easy to see the correct way. The correct way is just to develop the bishop at the same time defending the knight on d5. Because if we would take on c3, we would open up the bishop and open up some opportunities for white to go, for example, with the pieces out. Okay, maybe not really here, because queen cannot be developed so quickly, but bishop f7 could be already idea with knight coming to g5. So I would not really risk with that, and that's why bishop e6 is a good move, just defending the knight on d5 and finishing the development. And next move we will be ready to castle. So in case of bishop b5 here, so white is removing the bishop away and attacking the pawn on e5 at the same time. We have f6, of course, now in our pocket. We can go for it, defending the pawn on e5. Castle. Now knight c3 is good because now there are no issues any longer. Pawn takes. We managed to double some pawn structure for white. Queen d6, defending the knight on c6 as well. Bishop e3, just developing move. And after a6, we're kicking the bishop out. Bishop a4 and long castle. Again, we were talking about this kind of pawn structure and the open b file, but in this case, it's less dangerous or almost not dangerous for black, because the bishop is on this side of the board. It's not on g2. If the bishop would be on g2, fianchetto, it would be very dangerous due to all the attacks from white. But in this particular case, the bishop is not going to really attack us on the queen side, so that's why it's not a problem. And meanwhile, we're going to start creating our own attack on the queen side with march of the pawns with g and h. So knight g5. Knight g5 is attacking our bishop, also putting pressure on the f7 square. This move is leading to some trades and simplification, but we're just fine with that. There is no advantage for white there. So we're taking on c3, white is taking on e6, we're grabbing the queen is taken as well. Now we have to take on d8, there is no other move. King d1, and this is important actually. This is actually a very important moment now, because white is getting this bishop pair advantage in the endgame. And if we're not careful at this moment, if we're not reacting in the best way, then white would have material advantage due to this bishop pair, and as well long-term advantage as well. So that's why we have to react with knight a5, attacking the bishop on c4. Since there is no a3, which would allow white to retreat with the bishop back, bishop now is getting exchanged. Bishop goes to b5, c6. Now bishop is attacking our knight on a5. Interesting trick to double our pawns. Here we're just going to play rook d5, removing the rook from the attack. Again, we can see that we have a doubled pawns, but okay, it's still together with a pawn on a7, so they're not so weak. We have a pawn in the center and equal material. As a thank you for this double pawns, we're having semi-open file on semi-open C file, with which we can target the pawn on C2. And well, we're going just to fight this position. Objectively, it's around equal. Some problem with the pawn structure compensated by our space advantage and potential initiative against the pawn on C2, so it's not so bad. So this was a knight c3 move, and another slow move is h3. So h3 is of course a good prophylactical move, but it's slow because it lets us to have an extra move more for finishing the development and for coming closer to the position where we're just going to have the pawn on e5 fully defended, or pawn on f7 without any issues. So yeah, and we're just developing the pieces, and of course we're going for our main idea. Since okay, we cannot go for bishop g4 any longer, we're just going to go for bishop f5. So very, very logical. In case you would play something like knight bishop e6, then it's not really going to work well, because now knight g5 is coming with a tempo on our bishop. So we don't really want that. So bishop f5, perfect move. Again, we are getting prepared against all kind of knight g5 ideas from white, because then we will always have bishop g6 defending the pawn. So if queen comes to e2, creating a threat on e5, then there are some options. For example, we could go here with boss f6 and bishop d6. So if we would go with f6, the problem is that white might have ideas to break, but after d4, it would allow just knight db5. And now we're attacking both the pawn on d4 and the pawn on c2, so it's not really working out. White is castling, we're just going for queen d7, and here we're just going to transpose to the seventh move the castle, which we will see later, just in a few moments, by the way. So this is just transposing. And in case we want to go for something, to get something more, to play better move, then we have an option of bishop d6. Bishop d6 is interesting move. Knight is hanging on d5. Again, if we don't want that, we just play f6, queen d7, and we're just going to transpose. So bishop d6, the main idea is that, okay, let's look first at the castle, and then we're going to look at the main idea. So if white is not reacting, we're just having knight b6, bishop b3, and castle, and we basically don't have issues. But if white is taking on d5, then we have bishop b4 check. So now, in case c3 happens, we take the queen, take with the queen the bishop. We're sacrificing the piece, pawn takes. Bishop d3, attacking the queen, stopping any kind of castle. Knight c3, counterattack on our queen. Now queen goes back, but okay, we still keep our d-file. If queen d1, there is knight b4 with knight c2 coming, pretty much losing. And if queen e3, then in case of the castle, we are ready to push for the e4 to create a nice outpost on d3 square and take the pawn on b4. If queen c5, we just take on b4, trade of the queens, and we're just getting a absolutely crushing position, being down a piece for 2 pawns. If queen goes to e3, then if we want, we can also take on b4 here immediately, so we could castle or take on b4. So if knight takes on b4, queen e5, trading the queens, and after knight c2, king e2, knight e1, knight e3 is the problem. So in that case, we have to go for the castle, for the long castle, and then to create the threat. But let's see another option. Let's say white is going for knight c3 here. But of course, c3 line is the most critical after bishop d6, bishop b4. So that's the most critical to know, the c3 line. But knight c3 is okay. Okay, it's not creating any problems. The bishop is not under attack. We just take on c3 and we take on d5. We manage to create a bad pawn structure, double the pawns for white. We're ready to castle long. Our pawn on e5 is defended. Everything is pretty much well. But bishop d2 is a strong move. So here we have to take on d2. In case of knight takes on d2, we take on d5. We're ready to castle, and it's all working pretty well. So king has to take on d2. It's actually a very strong move from white, because after queen d5, knight c3 is targeting our queen. So white is saying they are not getting the castle. But of course, later in the game, they can bring the rook to d1 to e1 and then castle. So it's not really such a big problem, but still very exciting move to play. We go back with the queen to e6, because if queen would go to d6, there could be ideas of knight jumping to d5 or e4. So we don't want to allow that. And g5 attacking our bishop, which is going back, bishop g6, and knight e5. The main idea is, of course, to focus on this, on the problem of our unfinished development with castling. So we take, rook comes to e1, and now we're using this by taking the pawn on d3. We're winning back the pawn, so to say. Queen takes, fe, cd, and now short castle, targeting the pawn on f2. The position is around equal, it's balanced. We have bishop for the knight, which could be an advantage in this kind of endgames. Again, we have both of us have weaknesses. Weakness on d3, weakness on e6, also weakness on f2. I would say black would still have more chances due to more weaknesses, and also for just for the sake of us having the bishop against the knight. So that was the bishop d6. And yeah, again, so if we want to transpose from queen e2, we can play f6, and we're going to transpose to the main line. But if we want, we can go for this crazy bishop d6 move, which is very interesting. So castle, here we know what we do. We just go for queen d7, finishing our development, and everything is defended. So queen e2, white is trying to attack our pawn on e5. We have the defensive move f6, just building up such nice pawn structure. d4, white is still using the fact that king is in the center and attacking. And basically, it's the only move which has to be played right now as for white. Other than that, we will get just great position after castling. So we have to go forward with e4. Definitely possible to castle here, but the game is getting pretty much complex. But yeah, we're going for e4 because it looks a bit better. So in case of knight h4, targeting our bishop on f5, we cannot really move it away. There is no sense. If we move somewhere to e6, we will lose e4. If we move to g6, doesn't make any sense. We'll anyway get the bishop straighted. But we have knight d4. Knight d4, which is attacking both c2 and queen on e2. So queen d1 trying to defend and attacking at the same time on the file. And here we have very nice move, because not only our knight is attacked on d4, but also the bishop is attacked on f5, and the only move which is defending both is knight coming back to e7. We're opening up a defense of the queen on d4, and everything is now defended. There are no tricks. In case knight develops to d2, we're castling long, knight e4, and we played rook e8, and we are going to transpose to the second 10 move knight c3, which we are looking now. So knight c3. And so the main idea is, of course, that there is double attack on d5 and e4 at the same time. We're castling and introducing a threat of taking on f3 in case white is taking on d5. But okay, knight is taking on e4. There was no sense of taking on e4 on d5. So rook e8. And here, in case of bishop d3, which would be logical defending move, we just take 2 times and we have a 5, and we're going to win a whole piece. Bishop takes on d5, we take with the queen, knight f6, double attack, rook e2, I mean, we have to go for it, rook e2, knight takes, and bishop e4, attacking both knights, with the idea of messing up the pawn structure like this. If gf takes, we just take on c2, win back the pawn. I mean, one of the pawns. Now the pawn structure is pretty much ruined. The position is slightly better for black due to the rook activity, due to the piece activity, and bad pawn structure from white. If knight takes on e2, bishop takes, rook e1, we just go back with the bishop. We're having 2 pieces, the bishop and the knight, for the rook and 2 pawns. Even though the materially speaking, we can say that white's position is preferably our 2 bishop pair. Our bishop pair is just going to be very, very strong, and that's why we should have better position. c3, white is trying to defend everything and keeping the threat, taking on f3, taking on e2. So we play bishop d6. Now we're kind of trying to force white to do something to take on c3 or not. So white is taking, bishop takes, bishop on c4, on f4, rook f8, bishop g3. And of course, we are grabbing not pawn on f3, but pawn on b2. And basically, these pawns are weak on the f file. The pawn on c3 also could be weakness. We have very active pieces, and due to that, we're compensating for the having knight against the bishop. But generally speaking, we have really good chances, I would say, in this endgame. Objectively, the position, though, is equal. So that was knight c3 move. So what happens to bishop d5? So basically, white is just giving up the bishop, and we're happy to take it. Queen d5, knight c3, attacking both the queen and the e4. So it's maybe more tricky move order if we compare it to the simple knight coming to c3. it's a bit more tricky. So we have to move the queen now. Queen goes to e6. We have to defend the pawn on e4. Others, no, we're going to be in trouble. If d5 happens and we have intermezzo, very nice move. Taking on f3 is targeting the queen on f3, on e2, sorry. So if knight g5, the idea is to attack the pawn, and after take there is a d5. So we kind of have to take it. There is no other way. d5, and now we have knight d4 attacking the queen. So we're not really allowing this double of the pawns on the c5. So d4, pawn takes, knight takes. We're trading. Bishop takes the pawn on g5. h6. We're trying to get rid of the bishop. It's a bit annoying there. Bishop e3 and long castle. From the good sides of this position, we have a bishop pair. From bad things, we have this isolated pawn, which could be a weakness. But for that, we just have to use well our bishop pair to defend it and to create some attack against white. Generally, it's around equal position for chances for both sides. So that was it. And now we're going to go into the knight e5. So knight takes on e5 is going to basically equalize everything because many trades are coming after that. We're taking on e5, we have to do it, no other way. So now queen e2 attacking our knight. f6, we have to defend it, and d4. So now the idea is to win back the knight for the white. And here we have very nice idea. So if we're just going to long castle, then white is going to take on e5. Okay, even if we're just giving up a pawn, probably we'll have some compensation, but there is an even better option to give the knight, but a different one. Playing knight f4, attacking the queen. Secondly, the square on f4 is very good. And thirdly, there is no real way to defend on d4 for the queen, besides removing it from the e-file. So bishop has to take on f4. We take on d4. And now bishop e5, queen e5, queen e5, pawn takes. We're basically absolutely fine. Now our pawn, even though it's isolated, it's not so far advanced, so it's easier to defend it. And again, we have a bishop pair. In case queen goes to d1 with a threat of rook e1, it's already getting interesting. But we have to play bishop d6. Interesting idea to stop rook e1 with bishop e4. And now we create already some checkmate threats in the position. So white has to block them with g3, and now we're long castling, and we're letting white to try to attack our bishop. But the problem is that after white is actually attacking it, we just have bishop c5, introducing a threat of queen g3. And after removing the bishop from d6, there is actually a pin on the queen on d1. So it's not so easy to capture on e4 either. So, for example, after knight takes, we take on d1, rook takes. It's a bit tricky position because, okay, first it feels like that we won a queen for a rook and a piece, but there are some threats in the position. On knight d6 and rook d5 are threats in the position. So we cannot really do much, because if we're just going to remove the queen from this file, then there is going to be always this rook d5, and knight takes on c5. So if queen takes, let's say, on b2, then bishop is going to be taken by the knight. And if we're just going to move away, then there is this rook d5, a very annoying move. So the only way to go is to play bishop e7, just removing the bishop, and going into this line where knight d6, queen d6, rook d6, and bishop d6 is played, getting in the position of the rook endgame with the opposite colored bishops, where a draw is very likely result, also considering our pawn structure. Again, we can still try, we can still play, and maybe even win, but objectively speaking, it looks like the game should finish in a draw. But again, we had a fighting game. If we're getting here, white deserved a draw after finding all the best moves. So that was the h3 move. Sorry, wait, it was queen e2 move. It was queen e2 move, yes. So double check, maybe, yes, the best. No. Okay. It was the h3 move, yes, correct. It was the h3 move. So now we're going into the queen e2. Because we had queen e2 move in h3, that's why a little bit messed up. But okay, we're continuing. So queen e2. The main idea is, of course, to put more pressure on the e5 pawn with the knight and the queen. And it's pretty challenging now because it's immediately asking questions. How do we defend? What do we do? And we have some options in this position. So it's important to understand why the ones which are working, they are working, and the ones which are not working. So very logical move, which we feel like should work, is f6. And the other logical move, which we can feel can work, is bishop g4. So why did I say should work? Because, I mean, simply after f6, the only problem or something, it could be connected with some d4, trying to push and target the pawn on e5. But with bishop g4, it's already unclear if it's working or not. So let's see. If bishop g4, h3 first, asking questions, very logical from white. If we take on f3, queen takes, targeting here, also indirectly targeting on f7, and we're having a problem because how do we defend the knight? And we cannot really, because we have to go with the knight back to f6, which is going to weaken our defense of the pawn on e5. So white will be already slightly better. Bishop goes back to h5, which would be logical to keep the pin, right? To keep the pin. But after g4 breaking the pin, bishop goes back, knight e5, and with trades which are going to happen, basically we just lost a central pawn. White's king is going to be safe. It's going to be castling. We don't really have so many pawn pieces activity. So yeah, we're going to trade either the knight or the bishop in the next move, and just going to be a tough game down the pawn. So we don't want to get there. That's why it's important we start with f6. f6, defending the pawn, not allowing any kind of tricks with h3, g4. Reacting pretty much concretely here. So castle. Castle, just putting the king in the center, and in the next move, d4 is a threat. So now we go for the knight b6 move, targeting the bishop. If we go bishop g4 again, then there is just queen e4 attacking the bishop. White is trying to be very, very annoying actually here. So yeah, it's not really that great. Knight b6 attacking the bishop, which looks very logical. Now, again, if bishop goes to b5, keeping the pin here, then we're going to go for bishop d6, just putting full protection on the pawn on e5. And after, in the case of bishop takes, we have bc, d4, and after castle, we're just going to transpose to the nice move, the d4, castle, and bishop c6 line. So we're going to see it there. So here, d4, castle. In case pawn takes on e5, we're just grabbing it with a knight. We're happy because white didn't make our structure a bit broken on the queen side. So knight takes, bishop takes, and we are just fine. If bishop takes here, pawn takes here, we are transposing now. So there is rook d1 move. So the idea is just to put pressure on the d file and not allow us to take and threaten to take on e5. So here we have an easy choice. We're just going for take on d4. Knight d4, now queen e8, offering a trade of the queens. Queen trade happens. Knight c6, white is winning an extra pawn. Bishop g4, attacking the queen. There is a problem on e1. f3 has to be played to stop this attack. And after bishop f5, moving away, knight d4, rook a d8. Knight takes on f5 is not possible. Our all pieces are active. We're having already crushing positions. Bishop c5 is the move which is coming. While white pieces are still standing on the queen side. We lost a pawn, but we're going to win the game, so we're fine with that. Okay, so the d5 looks like the most logical move, just to keep the pieces, the pawns separated. We take with the f pawn. We don't want to give up our bishop, definitely. So now we took with a pawn. There are some weaknesses. There are some weaknesses on the c6, c7. e5 is also, I mean, it's isolated pawn, so it potentially is also a weakness, but we have a bishop pair, and we are having much more active pieces and lead in the development. Also, the semi-open f file on which we can put pressure on f3, playing bishop g4, and also putting pressure on the f2 square. Knight goes to d2, very logically also creating this connection to the other knight, but on the other hand, bishop is getting locked on c1. We play queen e8, we are ready to bring the bishop to g4, knight to d5, and continue our play. It's absolutely fine, we have a counterattack. If knight takes on e5, white wants to be very ambitious, just taking the pawn, then we're having queen e7, pinning the queen on e2. So if f4, which would be logical defending the knight, but it's just going to weaken the a7 g1 diagonal so much. So here we already go for a5. So main strat is to bring the bishop out and to pin this beautiful queen and the rook. Rook e1, removing it and also defending the queen on e2 at the same time. We play bishop a6 anyway, attacking the queen. Queen goes away. Rook a to e8. Again, we're pinning the rook. Pieces are not working for white. We gave up a pawn for a huge activity of the pieces. So for example, after a move like knight c3, we can already have knight c4 and basically win, because there are so many pins in the position. We can win back the pawn and have a crushing position. So what happens in the case of rook e1? Immediately, then we have queen h4. The threat is to take on e5 and to take on f2. So what to do? White has to stop it by playing g3 or f4. In case of g3, it would weaken so much the light squares around the king, considering the fact that white doesn't have a light squared bishop. Here we go for queen h3, knight d3, and now c5. Now we want to go with the bishop to b7 and create some very nasty threats which will be difficult to face as white. f4 is another move, trying to be more solid on the g and h file, but still is weakening the king. So here we go for bishop a6. The point is that the rook on e1 is getting without defense, so queen has to move away, queen f2. And after queen takes, king takes, we have knight d5, targeting the pawn on f4. g3 is the only way to defend, rook e1, and here king g1. I have a question to you. Which move to play as for black? Here, stop the video and try to find the best move. And the move is, of course, g5, breaking everything, breaking the defense on the knight. The knight is also getting in trouble. All our pieces are working. Amazing position for black, absolutely winning. Okay, that was knight e5. So knight goes to g5. The main idea of it, of course, not any longer attacking the pawn on f2, which is already not on f2 even, but placing the knight to e4, which is a good square, right? The blockade in front of the isolated pawn is a very good square for the knight, and that's what knight is aiming to go for. So we're playing queen e8. We have our own plan. We have our own plan to bring the queen to g6. With the idea if knight is coming to e4, we're going to challenge it there. Also put pressure on the pawn on c2. We're also going to put pressure on the g2 pawn with the idea of bringing the bishop to h3. So knight goes back to e4, queen g6. In case of c4, creating a threat of c5 and forking our pieces, we have bishop f5, a counterattack on the knight. Now, if knight goes to b to d2, defending, then we have knight d7. We're just removing the knight, stopping all the c5 problems, and we're just getting a good position, because now kind of white is a bit stuck with the pieces, and bishop cannot be developed very soon. So yeah, it's a little bit stuck position for white, since white has to defend everything. So if knight goes to c3 now, which looks more logical to open up the bishop from the c1. Then we go knight a4, very nice idea. So if knight takes on a4, the e4 is going to fall. So it's like kind of a pressure on both knights, and it's actually going to be clearly better, the clearly better position for black. Due to this enormous amount of pressure which we put on white and all our piece activity. f3, trying to defend the knight just like that, preparing for any kind of bishop f5 or something like this. But now we go with knight d5. We're bringing the knight to the active position where it's going to be a very good piece. Also, potentially it can go to f4 as well. Let's say after knight coming to c3, where it can take with we can trade the knights, because after knight takes on c3, we have again bishops f5 targeting the pawn on c2, and well, if white is going to place the knight on e4, we can consider taking it, but of course, then we're getting into worse position. So we're just going to see how the game is going to continue. But yeah, there is not going to be a perfect knight standing on e4 anyway. So, for example, if here knight e4 is played, we're just taking rook f1, king comes to f1, we bring the other rook. After king g1, there is just bishop c5, and we're going to win back. Not win back, but we're just going to win a pawn on e4 with a crushing position. So in case of bishop d2, trying to develop normally well, then we take on c2, we take the pawn. Queen c4 with a check, wants to take a pawn on c6. Well, we're giving it, but after e4, the position is getting tricky because bishop h2 is a huge threat. White has to handle it, and because otherwise they will lose the queen. Bishop, if knight goes to e4 in this position, well, then we can take again. Pawn takes. Of course, we don't have this trick any longer, but we're going to play c5. We have an extra pawn in the position. Of course, it's not really easy it's not going to be easy to use this extra pawn, but of course, white will have to still fight for the defense for a draw. So that was the bishop b5 move. Now we're getting into more of a bishop b3, trying to work on this on the light squares. Well, then we continued our plan. We are finishing the development. Bishop can come to g4, so we're playing bishop g4 here, not bishop f5, also pinning the knight at the same time. Now we don't really have problems with h3 and g4. So let's start with c3. So now white kind of stops all ideas with knight jumping to g4. Then we're going queen d7. We're just placing it there, and also pretty important to understand when we can go with the queen to d7, when we can go to e7. For now, queen d7 move is absolutely fine, because the most important that how do we handle the h3 move. But we're going to talk also about positions later in which we will have most likely to play queen e7, not to allow any kind of knight e5 jump. But in this case, we can go queen d7, because after h3, bishop h5. So the knight h5 is not really working. Rook e1, long castle. Now knight e5, trying to trick us, but okay, there is queen e8. Very nice idea. Defending the bishop, also putting the spin on the queen. Knight goes back to g4, trying to defend absolutely everything. Queen e2, rook e2, and now rook d3. So now we're more developed, we're more active. We took an extra pawn, which white had. The next moves, we're going to finish the development with bishop h5 and bringing the other rook to d8. It's going to be tough to handle for white. So if bishop goes to e3, then we're already getting a different position. So if here we play queen d7, after h3, if we play queen f3, bishop f3, queen f3, long castle, it would be fine. We gave up a bishop pair though, but okay, we still have the pawn on e5, which is completely fine. It's a good piece. It's a good pawn on e5, very defended by all pieces, so it's good. But if we go to bishop to h5 after rook e1, there is already a threat of knight coming to e5. So after bishop e7, we have to remove the bishop. Bishop takes, queen takes, bishop takes on b6, a6, and d4. and white is opening up the position, and we have issues now. We're going to defend this, but we're just in a bit of trouble right now. So yeah, we have to defend this position pretty tough. So that's why in this position we go for queen e7. So there are no this knight e5 tricks any longer. So a4. A4 is a move which white would always try to make. The main idea of the a4 move is to create more space on the queen side, which we don't allow. So almost always when a4 is on the board, we are automatically or almost automatically replying with a5. So now knight c3. Of course, the advantage of this move for white that the b5 square could be a good thing later in the attack on the queen side. But it's absolutely fine for now. Long castle, bishop b6, pawn takes, knight b6, knight b5, and queen e8. So while white created this very nice outpost on b5, we're going to develop with bishop c5, bring queen to g6, going to put pressure against white's king, remove our king to b8 as a prophylactical move. And it's actually not so easy to see the next attacking ideas for white on the queen side. So that was the castle. In case of immediate d4 attacking our pawn, which is very, very direct and immediately asking concrete questions. So here already we have a different setup. f6 is already played, so that means we can go for bishop g4. In that way, we're pinning the knight. Knight is not attacking any longer, and the h3 tricks are not working because the pawn on d4 is also hanging. So let's start with the moves. For example, if white is just defending on c3 because knight d4 was a threat, then we are playing just queen d7, h3, just taking, castle, and we're just having a clearly better position because there is not much white achieved. We're threatening to take on d4, and if white takes, we're taking with the knight, having great position. If queen goes to e4, trying to create a double attack, is not going to work so much, but okay, it's of course forcing us to trade. So bishop f3. If pawn takes on f3, we have knight b6 attacking the bishop. Bishop has to go somewhere. Probably on b5 makes more sense to put more pressure on e5. Bishop b5, queen d4. Now bishop c6, pawn c6, queen c6, and king f7. Now the rook is defended on a8. We're just having a better position. We're ready to develop with the bishop coming out. White is still have issues with development. So yeah, we have a slightly better position and our king is safer. If queen takes on f3, then we'd have an intermezzo move, knight takes on d4, allowing white to take on d5. Since after take, trade happens, knight c2, double attack, the fork, king e2, and after knight e1, bishop e4, we have bishop c5. So our idea would be to try to get rid of the bishop, try to kick it from the e4 square. We're going to play also bishop d4. And it's going to last some time for white to take the knight on a1. So meanwhile, we have to create some ideas to try to get it out. But there are many ideas. Okay, for example, this bishop d4, definitely after every b3 move is going to be defending the knight. And other than that, the g6, f5 moves and bringing the rooks into the play will also help. So if pawn takes on e4, e5, then we take with the knight on e5. So knight cannot take because of the queen. So queen e4, again, double attack in a way, because now knight e5 is a threat. Bishop f3 is the only move, how we can handle it. Pawn takes, and now knight b6 again. Very important attacking the bishop, because f4 is just coming in the next move. So bishop goes to e2, we just play queen d5, offering a trade, and basically getting into the endgame where white will have worse pawn structure, but bishop pair, so around equal position. So bishop goes back to b3, white is creating two threats. First of all, going for f4, attacking our knight on e5, and second is targeting the pawn on b7. We play queen d7 because the idea is that after f4, we can just create a threat. We ignore the 4 because there is a very nasty threat of checkmate in one. So that's why white is not really going to help. Queen takes on b7 is though possible, but here we have bishop b4. And well, the main idea is, of course, that c3 is going to weaken the d3 square for our knight to jump with a check. So that's why knight c3 is kind of the only move. Now we go for the c5, very strong move, offering a trade to our queens. Queen take, now king take. We have all our pieces out in the game. We're down a pawn right now, but the pawn on f3 is hanging also. It's a doubled pawn, which is a weakness. White is going to have bishop pair, but for now they are not really working harmoniously together. Meanwhile, our pieces are ready to jump out, so there is definitely a compensation, even maybe slightly better position for black. If bishop goes to b5 immediately, white is just copying what we did. We pinned the knight on on f3. White is pinning the knight on c6, which was defending the pawn on e5. And there are already concrete threats of taking and taking with a queen. So we have to handle it, and we play queen d7 now. The thing is that after white is, if white is trying to take, okay, we're going to look rather at those lines, but let's first see what happens if white takes. So pawn takes, we shouldn't worry because we have an intermediate move, castle. Since now, okay, white cannot really keep the pawn because there are going to be enormous threats, like rook e8. There are still problems for white. White has to castle or do something with the pin on f3. So let's say white castle, then we have knight db4, attacking on c2, potentially also taking on f3 is a threat. Queen e5 is also a nice move, which is incoming. Knight c3 is just normal developing move, but it has nothing to do with the queen f5. Now again, we're targeting c2, we're targeting f3, knight d4 is the move. And after bishop takes, knight takes, pawn takes on f6, we grab it with a queen, building up a pressure again against the knight on c3. And well, we're just having a slightly better position with the bishop pair. I would already say that it's clearly better, but the computer says it's just slightly better, maybe due to the pawn. But definitely we have too many active pieces for white to handle. h3, trying to ask our bishop a question. Where does it go, or does it take on f3? And of course we gotta take, otherwise we would lose a pawn. So bishop takes, queen takes, and here I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. So I hope you found it. It's of course knight d2 b4, attacking the pawn which was just defended, but now it's not defended any longer. So white has to defend it with knight a3. Now we go for a6, attacking the pawn, the bishop on b5. The bishop takes on c6. We grab it with a knight, and the point is that white cannot take the pawn on f6 because there is going to be the knight d4 attacking the queen, attacking the pawn, bringing the rook to e8. White is going to have issues with the king. In case white is going just a bishop a4, then we have queen e6. We want to take on e5 with the pawn, not to make our pawn structure broken with taking with a pawn. And that is just going to bring us some slight advantage for sure due to our piece activity. So what happens in case of c4? White is trying to be very ambitious, trying to attack immediately the knight, and just trying to follow it up with the d5 move, targeting the knight on c6, using the fact that there is a pin on the queen and the king. So we go for bishop b4. It's a very important intermezzo because in case white is just going to defend from the check with putting a piece on d2, we're going to use the fact and put our knight to the beautiful f4 square, attacking the queen and creating many threats in the position. And of course, bringing the knight to c3 is not really possible due to our take on c3. So there is no real choice for white. Okay, one more time. If knight vd2, knight f4, that's bad. The queen is almost lost, but rather knight is coming to d3. And if bishop goes the same. So king f1 is kind of the only move in this position for white. Now we long castle. We don't care about the knight. This is actually the line where we are sacrificing a piece. The second line where we sacrifice this piece. It is a pretty messy position, but the most important here is just with all the development that we have, is just to believe in our position, to believe in our power. King cannot castle, there are pieces still not out, the rook is on h1, is not playing, and we have all the pieces already out of the board. So to try to show something, white, of course, should try to grab the piece. So for example, if c d5, we just take with a queen. And there are already many threats taking on d4 or playing e4. So every move white has to handle all the threats. Let's start with queen c4. White is going for queen c4, offering a trade, trying to get into the endgame. So here we go for bishop f3. Of course, the threat is after queen takes on d4, queen takes on d5. There is bishop takes, and we won back the piece. But after gf, there is queen f3, and basically we can already see how great position is. If bishop takes on c6, we are just checking second time and playing rook d4. The next move, we're going to have a checkmate for the white's king. If queen goes to e6 with a check, the main idea is to stop black's king to go to g4. We go back to b8, bishop c6, bc, now rook g1, and now we're making another couple of checks, but on d3, queen d3, queen e4, and now we're taking with the rook on d4. Now again, we have the same threat, and basically white will have to give up a lot of material in order not to be checkmated. So that was queen c4. If knight c3, white is trying to attack us. Of course, we have to take it. We have to be fast in this position. Bishop takes, pawn takes, and now e4. We're going to win the piece back, and we're just going to have just much better position due to all our development piece activity and white's inactivity. So in case of h3, it should attack the pawn, the bishop on g4. It makes some sense to have two pieces under attack and threaten to take boss. But in this kind of position where the bishop on g4 is attacked, we're going to have always this idea of taking on f3 as an intermezzo move. So it's not really that two pieces are hanging, but it's rather like we will always have opportunity to escape this. So we go for knight f4, attacking the queen. So now bishop f4, now our intermezzo move, bishop f3. In case queen takes, we have queen d4 with all kinds of threats. I mean, we're first of all attacking the bishop on f4, the pawn on b2 is hanging. There is also queen d1 with grabbing the rook on h1 is also on the board, so too many threats to handle. If pawn takes on f3, then we're taking on e4. Now we have equal material, we didn't give up a piece. d5, white is still trying to win a piece, but now rook h e8, bringing to attack the queen. So now if queen goes to c2, then there is rook h1, rook e1, king comes to g2, king takes, and now we have intermezzo queen h3, and after king goes to g1, knight is just going to e5 with the next move. The checkmate in a few moves, so yeah, it's not really working for white. So a3 is much better choice for white because attacking the bishop on b4 and attacking the knight on d5 is not going to let black to take any piece, like there is no knight on c3. So that's why it's better option. Here we can go for knight f4. And after bishop f4, I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. So we have the bishop hanging on b4. We have just white just had taken our bishop on f4, and we are going for queen d4. Absolutely insane move and insane position. Crazy move in the position where the bishop is under attack. This bishop we could have taken, but we're not doing it. So the main idea of this, if after knight d4 there is a check on e2 and white cannot take with the knight due to the cute little checkmate on d1. So now if king takes on e2, then we grab the knight on d4, king goes back, we grab on b5, and basically we're just going to end up with currently we're up a pawn, but rook d1 is a huge threat, so it's going to be tough for white to defend that. We're going again to the winning position. And if white is taking on b4, then we have queen d1. If queen e1 defending, we just have bishop f3, gf, queen takes, many threats, rook d1, taking on h1 is also a threat, so bishop f6, white is trying, bc, bishop e3, now rook d1, rook g1, queen h3. We're just giving checks to take the queen in the better circumstances and also to take the pawn on h2. So check, now one more check, now we take it. And now we take on h2 with attacking the rook. Because it's important, since we're getting in the endgame where we have a queen for rook and two minor pieces. So we have to make sure that we either win like many pawns, or we create some attack on the king. Because if we would just spend time for winning pawns, then it would be not so easy. So position is clearly better for black, by the way. Knight c3, attacking our queen. We have to do something. We play queen d3, checking the king. Now king g1, and now e takes f4. The main idea is that after taking on f3, we have knight d4. We remove our knight, creating a threat of knight f3, queen f4, stopping all these forks, but knight f3 is coming with a check. King g2, and after knight h4, another check. King has to go back to g1. So here we could already make a draw if we play against Grandmaster or something, but of course, we can also continue, because after trade of the queens, rook d4, targeting the knight, we're entering the endgame down the whole piece, since after knight c3, rook h to d8, and white is having big issues with the rook on h1. King can never really come out, because there will be always threats of coming with the rook to d1, or knight has to stay on c3 all the time to do it. But other than that, we're ready to kick the bishop from the b5. We're ready to take the pawns. Most likely we're going to get the pawns on the queen side. So for that, we're going to have not only the compensation for the piece, but we are going to have a winning position, winning endgame. That was a queen e1. In case of queen taking on d1, so trading the queens, rook d1, knight e1, trying to defend everything. We're just taking the bishop. Now our rook is just amazing. Again, we're still down a piece. Let's not forget about that. So bishop takes on a c6. We have to take it back. Rook a7, winning pawn. Now king b8. We have to attack, not allowing any rook a8. So knight c3 now, attacking our rook. We take the rook. If knight takes on d1, we can just take with the bishop. But in case white goes for f3, we just play rook d2. Since after fg, we just take on b2. We're having rook for 2 knights and 1 pawn. But the pawns of the white on the queen side, they are pretty weak. So we are actually going to most likely win them. When white's pieces are pretty passive. So for that, we should definitely have some slight edge in this endgame. Very interesting one with some interesting material imbalance. So that was basically the queen e2. Now we're going to go into the main line, the most common and kind of the best move at the same time, the short castle, which introduces immediately the rook coming to e1. And well, anyway, at some moment white wants to castle short. Why not to do it now? Also using the fact that our king still needs a few moves to be castled, or at least one bishop move. And so that's why it's very important. And now we're coming to our main move here. Actually, there are some moves for black. For example, one of the moves is bishop e7. This is how normally this position is being played on the top level, with bishop developing on e7, but we are going for the knight b6. Knight b6 is fourth most popular move. It's interesting move. And we are immediately asking a question, pretty much forcing white to decide, does white want to have bishop on b3 or white want to have bishop on b5? To be honest, putting bishop on b5 is more challenging, as we also saw in the other lines. When bishop was on b5, I mean, there were not so many lines, but also when bishop was on b5, it was more challenging because white would always put pressure on the pawn on e5. So that's why that line deserves a separate chapter. And in this chapter today, we're going to discuss the bishop b3, because it's less challenging. It's not putting pressure on the pawn on e5. It's not pinning our knight. But it's creating an attack on the pawn on f7. So we have to be always careful with knight g5, always. Because, for example, now we could say, oh, well, let me just develop the pieces just normal way, playing something like, well, bishop d6, why not? And then when our opponent is playing knight to g5, he will be like, okay, the pawn is under attack, well, let's just defend and castle. And then when queen is coming to h5, he will realize, oh my god, the position is just disaster. And it's over. The game is over. So that's why very important first to take care of the threats on f7. So bishop g4 is a move which we're going for. We just pin the knight. We're not allowing any knight g5 jumps. And also nothing is working out with a bishop f7, knight g5. Since we have a queen on d8, which is handling all of it, is not working out. So that's also important to know. So rook e1. Rook e1 immediately attacking the pawn on e5, but it looks like from this variation we are most likely going to transpose because white at some point should play h3, targeting our bishop on g4, and then we'll transpose. So here queen e7, we're just going for this move because it's very likely to transpose. But interesting alternative in this position is playing queen f6. It's important that we can play queen f6 here before h3 is being played. Since if we would have already a3 and bishop on h4, then there would be g4 to follow. So it's not going to be the same. So that's why f6, queen f6 could be played only here to put pressure on the f3, which could be an interesting alternative. But if we play queen e7, we're just going to transpose to the line, because after a4, again, we almost always react with a5, and it's not an exception here. And now after h3, bishop h5, we're just transposing to the h3 move. So h3, bishop goes back. So if here we are going for queen f6, then it's not really working, because after g4, bishop goes back, knight c3, and while we're just having big problems how to castle, what to do, because bishop g5 is already a big threat in the position, and yeah, it's very, very difficult, getting very tough for black. And the other thing is that bishop d6, developing the bishop and castling alongside would not really work out, because here there is knight e5, attacking the knight on c6, and also the bishop on h5. So after bishop d1, knight c6, and we're actually lost because it's a check, discover check, and taking the queen. That's why we have to play queen e7 here, very important. Defending the pawn on e5, even though we're putting the queen on the same file with the rook, kind of x-raying ourselves or pinning ourselves and blocking our bishop, but it's a necessary move for now. And later, after we castle long, we're going to have the same x-ray against the white's queen. So let's see what happens after if white goes for breaking the pin, g4. Looks very logical, because white is trying to create target on e5, and black's bishop is just not letting it. So bishop goes to g6, and after d4 castle, we're pinning the rook, and we're also being pinned at the same time. The thing is that now it's pretty tough, because the pawn on d4 is already under big attack with the knight and the rook, so it's going to be pretty tough for white to continue. Most likely white is losing a pawn on d4. So queen comes to e2, putting even more pressure on e5. Well, we have to handle it, and we have to play f6 now, defending the pawn, getting this pawn structure. So d4. And by the way, in this position, lock on castle would be also possible, because even if white is taking on e5, we're going to get a compensation. But of course, if we can just defend the pawn, then it's also good. So d4, trying to put even more pressure, and if white is not playing this d4 move, we're just going to castle without any problems. So now castle happens, pawn takes on e5, and we are using the fact that white overexpanded on the king side. We are immediately challenging with h5. So in case of g5, trying to block, first of all, lock the king side. So there is no the h file opens. We're taking on e5 with a knight. Knight takes, queen takes, the trade happens, and basically the position will be very unbalanced. Rook cannot take on e4, on e5 due to the rook d1. So the position is very interesting. We're having kind of a weak pawn, but white's king is less safe, even though it's like an endgame. These pawns might be also weaknesses, so we're having interesting position for sure. So if pawn takes on f6, we trade the queens, take on g4. And if hg, there is a very nice move, rook d1. And after rook e1, I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. It's a very beautiful bishop e4. The main idea is, of course, that we target the knight and we let white take our rook, since after bishop f3, the checkmate on h1 is unstoppable. Very beautiful, cute little move. So pawn takes on g7. White is trying to take all the pawns. Then we have bishop g7. Of course, we shouldn't allow any promotion. Bishop g7. Now bishop e6 check. White is trying to stop the checkmate ideas, not to open the h file. So we're going back with a king to b8. Bishop takes, and after rook d1, take on f3. Sorry, on c1. Then take on b2. We can also take on c2, because if white is going to take, we're going to grab the rook. So we're getting pretty funny position here, where we're going to have a protected, connected passers, c and b pawns on the queen side, and white will have h and f pawns, which should be slightly better for black, because connected passers are usually better pawns to promote. So in case of a4, we're as always reacting with the a5, just always stopping it. We don't want to allow more space on the queen side for white to create also attack. Okay, and as an compensation for that, of course, white is having this b5 square later, but it's also not so easy to take a use of it. So knight c3, immediately going for that b5 square, long castle, knight b5, and now f6. We're just finished our setup with the e5 pawn. We fully developed, or fully, sorry, protected it, and we are ready to march with a g pawn, because it could create a hook due to the pawn on h3 and the knight on f3. That was a4. In case of d4, so white is trying to open up everything. Nobody actually tried it in practice, because it feels like that after castle, white will not really have any issues. So castle, but it's still pretty tricky, because after c3, it looks like that we have both queens pinned, and it's not so clear to understand what to do. But now we play queen d6, getting rid with a queen from the pin. If knight a3 is played, so trying to develop but also creating some threats and also defense. So if pawn takes on d4, then there is knight b5, using the square, but of course there is still a6 possible, but not for now. So queen goes to g4, g6. We're putting pressure against the king and also the knight on f3 potentially. Knight bd4, knight d4, cd4. And now basically the g4 is a threat, and we're not really having, that position before. So we kind of have to take on f3, but if we take on f3, there is going to be a problem on f7. So it's not something what we want to do. So that's why it's better to start with the h6. We're just covering the g5 square. Now we're ready to move our queen to f6, attacking the knight on f3, creating some problems. So after g4, bishop goes back to g6, knight e5, rook e5. And now queen goes to d7. We are ready to play bishop d6 and open up the king's position, since the pawns are overexpanded on the king side, with h5 move, which is going to be great. And very good chances for black, even though we're currently down the pawn. It's at least compensation, but I would say that's slightly better for black for sure. So g4 immediately, trying to kick our bishop back. Bishop goes back. If knight takes on e5, we're grabbing it. So rook e5, queen c6, and in the next moves, we're ready to go with the bishop to d6, and again h5 to break everything. It's not so clear and not so fast to see how white is going to attack our king, because we're more solid on the queen side. And if pawn takes on e4, well, we remove our queen, also target the queen on d1 at the same time. And basically in the next move, we are ready to play bishop c5, rook comes to d3. Our pieces are more active. There are problems for white on the queen side. So yeah, it's a very tough position to play. We are clearly better. If pawn takes on e5, immediately then queen d1 takes, and after bishop d1, bishop e7. So we had to take on d1 because there was no square on f6, on c6. But now we're reaching the end game where we're having much better developed pieces. With the knight coming to c4, we will be able to win the pawn back on e5. Also, we always have the h5 plan. We can put it always, we can push always the pawn to h5. So definitely at least a compensation, but also could be slightly better for black endgame like this. And basically the main move out of a few games which were played, I mean, not so many games, this is the main move, which was met in the practice, but okay, it's definitely the other moves can also happen. So white's main idea, of course, to try to defend on c3. So now we're castle long. If white is going with knight to f1, just trying to remaneuver it, if we're playing here e6, which it feels like should be working, but unfortunately it's not, because after knight g3, white even attacks one more time the pawn. We cannot take on f3 due to the our queen hanging. So after bishop takes, pawn takes, we're just suddenly realizing that the pawn is going to take our pawn on e4, and well, we're just going to be worse. So that's why important here to continue to follow up. We're going with f6, just finish our defense on the e5 square and introduce a threat of knight coming to d4 and challenging white's knight on f3. So for example, after c3, which would stop idea of knight d4, we can play queen d6, and now we're attacking the pawn on d3, which is not actually easy to defend, and it's not anyway already not possible to push it forward because the queen is already on d6 and there is no pin any longer. So for sure there is a comfortable play and advantage for black. If knight comes to e4, so the main idea is to bring the knight knight to g3. Also, this was an idea to bring it to g3 via the f1 square, but now basically we don't have queen d6 available. So, but we go with f6 move, of course. First of all, is defending the pawn on e5, and secondly, there is an extra square for the bishop on f7. In case white is starting to push the pawns forward or attacking the bishop. Now, c3 again, the same idea. With f6, we supported the pawn on e5, and knight d4 was already introduced in the position. So king b8 is a typical prophylactical move, removing the king. And now after king knight g3, we go bishop f7, offering a trade for the bishop. And this is the only position where white can still try to go for d4, since the queen is still pinned to the like the pawn is still pinned to the queen. At the same time, the same is happening for the white. So in case we go knight c4 here, there is just queen e2, and it's just going to be unnecessary. So this is like the main idea of this bishop c7 move, to have the move knight c4, but only after bishop is being developed to bishop being developed, and then we have this knight c4 with a tempo, because otherwise it's not really working. So then we are playing a6. We're just waiting and see what white wants to do, and of course we're also improving at the same time. Now after queen e2, we take on b3, pawn takes, then we take on e4, ready for all the trades. Bishop takes, now knight f4, knight f5, attacking both the bishop and the pawn, knight e5, defending everything, and also creating a threat of taking on c3. So if knight takes on d4, we're having a couple of knight trades, rook e1 also defending the bishop. And well, we reached kind of an equal endgame. We have bishop and the knight, bishop and the knight. There are double pawns for white. Should we say it's could be kind of a weakness? But okay, the pawns are all together. It's tough to say it's a weakness. Around equal endgame for chances for both sides. So that was the knight e4 move. And now a4, basically this is one of the ideas which white is trying to use in this kind of structure. Of course, we have to always stop it with a5, especially now since we castled. It might feel like some weakening move, but actually now since the knight is on d2 and not on c3, it's already even much better for black, since no knight is going to come to b5 any longer. And we didn't let white to expand on the queen side. If knight comes to e4 with the same idea, now the problem is that it's not really in time, since now knight d4 is working and we're attacking the knight on f3. And well, we don't not only have a choice to take on f3, but also on b3. So that would even break the pawn structure of white even worse. Queen comes to e2, then we have to do something about our problem on e5, and we have the f6 move as possible. f5 would also be interesting here, but of course f6 is more solid, and we're going to finish the development in the next moves, and then we're going to decide. We will always have some f5 ideas later. So if queen goes to e3, after queen d7, there are already big threats into the position after knight e5. And actually, computer is already saying it's a winning position for black, very interestingly, because of g5 ideas, g5, g4, knight coming to d5. It's very tough to handle for white. So c3 trying to stop our knight d4 ideas, jumping forward. Then we just play prophylactical king b8. If d4 happens, then we can take. The queen comes to b5 with the idea of trade. Of course, we don't afraid trade on e7, but queen b5 is attacking our rook, queen. Queen c5 offering a trade and also defending the pawn on d4. And after knight d4, we have to take ourselves. Pawn takes, and after a couple of trades, bishop takes on e4. We are taking on c3, and now we're taking on c6 at the end of the line after knight rook a5. Bishop d6, we are up a pawn for white's bishop pair. Of course, it's not really much, but definitely white will have to try to defend here. It's not so easy how to create a passer here, but definitely black should, if someone, then black should be the one side who is actually playing for the, or trying to play for the win in this endgame. So that was a d4 move. And in case of knight e4, just bringing the knight to e4 again with the idea of knight g3. Now we go bishop f7, because after trade, we're just having a very nice advantage due to the problem on the d3 square. The d3 pawn is pretty weak, and yeah, we have just easy play with the g and h pawn marching later on with g4 ideas, like using this hook against the white's king. And yeah, the position looks just great and at least slightly better for black. So now we're going to go through the key moments and the most important ideas from this chapter, starting with this position. First of all, this position, there is no move which we should play. The move was already played, which was knight takes on d5. Just generally talking about this position, so there are, of course, like, this is not the only chapter on this, but we're just going to discuss what the main thing in the position, what the most important idea for black is, definitely to handle the weaknesses and the problems. And the problems and weaknesses are the pawns on e5 and f7. So that's why we have to pay really good attention on the ideas against this. For example, bishop coming to b5, attacking, or not attacking, but pinning our knight, queen e2 after castle rook e1, and so on, putting pressure on e5 if white wants to attack on e5, or in case white wants to attack on f7, then moves like knight coming to g5. At some moment, even sacrificing on f7, it can work. We should always keep an eye on them. Well, also bringing the queen out to f3 and h5. So these are two main ideas, and that's why it's very important to understand. If we can keep this pawn in the center on e5 long term, we're going to have an advantage. But for now, it's like a problem, but it's just short term. And if we're fixing it, we're just good. We're just having good position. Okay, next position is happening after knight g5 is played. This move is not good, it's dubious, but it's important to know how to react on it. And we were already discussing here that we cannot just react in the normal way, because we have to go for f6. So if we play again bishop e7, then there is already knight f7 or knight c3 line. So we have to play f6 here, attacking the knight. And maybe one more move, just important, after knight c3, it's important to not to take on c3, but play bishop b4, pinning the knight on c3. That's just two important moves in this line to remember. The next position with pawn on c3, the main idea is for queen to come out to b3. And if we're just going to slowly continue the development, we're going to have issues on f7. So that's why a very important move is knight to b6, attacking the bishop. And now if bishop goes to b5, then there is no issue with the f7 pawn any longer. And if bishop goes back to b3, then there is no queen coming to b3. So we have to be happy. The next position is where white played h3. h3 is kind of a slow move. It's stopping bishop g4, but it's a slow move. But also important not to develop, not to see, okay, white is not doing anything. We can just play queen bishop. Okay, actually bishop d6 is not really possible, but bishop, for example, e6 can be played. But after bishop e6, there is knight coming to g5. So yeah, and if we're just going for, I don't know, like just doing some random move, just to show you that there is always a problem with knight coming to g5. So we have to also not forget about that. So that's why we play for bishop f5 to stop all ideas against our f7 square. Bishop f5, later on it can be placed on g6 to defend on f7. So that's how we are playing here. The next position is after queen coming to e2, one of the challenging approaches in the position, instantly asking a question to the pawn on e5. And here we have to go for f6. It's important to remember that bishop g4 is not really working out. Bishop g4 we cannot really go because there is going to be a3 move and g4, and white will take the pawn on e5. So f3 is important move to play in this position. So the next position is already this is this position where we sacrifice a piece. So first of all, it's pretty messy. Yes, we can all agree on this. But what we have to understand, looking at our all developed pieces, is that we're better in development. We're better with activity of the pieces. So we have to trust in our position. And after a long castle, white can take our piece. White can take, maybe we'll not remember all the moves in this position, but we have to trust in power of our pieces. And at some moment, white will have to give up the material back. So we're going to get either the piece back, or we will get a lot of pawns. So we shouldn't be like worried here, or like very much sad that we lose a piece, but we rather have to accept it as an opportunity for us to create attack against white. The next position is after bishop b3 being played. So this is already like the main line of today's chapter. Bishop either goes to b5 or to b3. And here it's important to remember the move. If we're just going to continue development with something like bishop d6, we're going to get into trouble very early on after knight to g5. If we say, okay, we can castle and defend, queen h5 is coming, and huge problems for us on h7 and f7. So that's why it's very important to go bishop g4. Bishop g4 first, pinning the knight, and then we are ready to play the queen to d7 or e7 and castle long. Next position is with rook h on e1. So yeah, this is very important position to understand. Ideally, of course, queen on d7 looks also optically, it looks better, but sometimes it's not really working out, and we have to go for queen e7. When this knight e5 jump is working out, we have to go for queen e7. We're self-pinning ourselves, but in the next move, we're going to bring our rook, after a long castle, we bring our rook to d8, and we're going to pin white as well. So it's going to be a double pin. We're going to pin white, white will pin us. So it's going to be kind of fair. The next position, I believe the last one, is this a4 move, which is very topical. When white is going for a4, we're not allowing white to expand on the queen side. We're not allowing white to go for the a5. So that's why we have to stop it by playing a5 ourselves. So almost always, almost 100% of the time, we have to react on it with a5. Even though we're giving up a square on b5, it's not so easy to use it. I mean, knight can get there, it will be beautiful, but it's not much than just a square where the knight's standing beautiful with no real attack. So yeah, one more time, a4, most likely we're going to play with a5. So that was the last position for today. Thank you so much for watching, for learning together, and I hope it was very useful for you, learned a lot, and I'll see you in the next chapter.